Okay, I feel like it's been 10 years since I've read, but I'm back. And we're going to start chapter 18 of American Gods. I know that's probably backwards. All right, chapter 18. None of this can actually be happening. If it makes you more comfortable, you could simply think of it as a metaphor. Religions are, by definition, metaphors after all. God is a dream, a hope, a woman, an ironist, a father, a city, a house of many rooms, a watchmaker who left his prized chronometer in the desert, someone who loves you, even, perhaps, against all evidence, a celestial being whose only interest is to make sure your football team, army, business, or marriage thrives, prospers, and triumphs over all opposition. Religions are places to stand and look and act, vantage points from which to view the world. So none of this is happening. Are you really going to do this right now? Why are you being crazy? Anyway, so none of this is happening. Such things could not occur in this day and age. Never a word of it is literally true, although it all happened, and the next thing that happened like this. At the foot of Lookout Mountain, which is scarcely more than a very high hill, men and women were gathered around a small bonfire in the rain. They stood beneath the trees, which provided poor cover, and they were arguing. The Lady Kali, with her ink-black skin and white sharp teeth, said, "It is time." Anansi, with lemon-yellow gloves and silvering hair, shook his head. "We can wait," he said. "While we can wait, we should wait." There was a murmur of disagreement from the crowd. "All right, stop it." Oh my God, he's being really crazy right now. "No, listen, he's right," said an old man with iron gray hair, Chernabog. He was holding a small sledgehammer, resting the head of it on his shoulder. "They have the high ground. The weather is against us. This is madness, to begin this now." Something that looked a little like a wolf and a little more like a man grunted and spat on the forest floor. What's the guy? "When better to attack them, Dedushka? Shall we wait until the weather clears, when they expect it? I say we go now. I say we move." "There are clouds between us and them," pointed out Istin of the Hungarians. He had a fine black mustache, a large dusty black hat, and the grin of a man who makes his living selling aluminum siding and new roofs and gutters to senior citizens, but who always leaves town the day after the checks clear, whether the work is done or not. A man in an elegant suit, who had until now said nothing, put his hands together, stepped into the firelight, and made his point succinctly and clearly. There were nods and mutters of agreement. A voice came from one of the three warrior women who comprised the Morrigan, standing so close together in the shadows that they had become an arrangement of blue-tattooed limbs and dangling crow's wings. She said, "It doesn't matter whether this is a good time or a bad time. This is the time. They have been killing us. They will continue to kill us, whether we fight or not. Perhaps we will triumph. Perhaps we will die. Better to die together, on the attack, like gods, than to die fleeing and singly, like rats in a cellar." Another murmur, this time one of deep agreement. She had said it for all of them. Now was the time. "The first head is mine," said a very tall Chinese man with a rope of tiny skulls around his neck. He began to walk, slowly and intently, up the mountain, shouldering a staff with a curved blade at the end of it, like a silver moon. Oh, this isn't showing the orb. There we go. Even nothing cannot last forever. He might have been there, been nowhere, for 10 minutes or for 10,000 years. It made no difference. Time was an idea for which he no longer had any need. He could no longer remember his real name. He felt empty and cleansed in that place that was not a place. He was without form and void. He was nothing. And into that nothing a voice said, "Hoka, cousin, we got to talk." And something that might once have been Shadow said, "Whiskey Jack?" "Yeah," said Whiskey Jack in the darkness. "You are a hard man to hunt down when you're dead. You didn't go to any of the places I figured. I had to look all over before I thought of checking here. Say, you ever find your tribe? Shadow remembered the man and the girl in the disco beneath the spinning mirror ball. I guess I found my family, but no, I never found my tribe. Sorry to have to disturb you. No, you aren't sorry. Let me be. I got what I wanted. I'm done. They are coming for you, said Whiskey Jack. They are going to revive you. But I'm done, said Shadow. It was all over and done. No such thing, said Whiskey Jack. Never any such thing. We'll go to my place. You want a beer? He guessed he would like a beer at that. Sure. Get me one too. There's a cooler outside the door, said Whiskey Jack, and he pointed. They were in his shack. Shadow opened the door to the shack with hands it seemed to him he had not possessed moments before. There was a plastic cooler filled with chunks of river ice out there, and in the ice, a dozen cans of Budweiser. He pulled out a couple of cans of beer, and then sat in the doorway and looked out over the valley. They were at the top of a hill, near a waterfall, swollen with melting snow and runoff. It fell in stages, maybe 70 feet below them, maybe 100. The sun reflected from the ice which sheathed the trees that overhung the waterfall basin. The churning noise as the water crashed and fell filled the air. Where are we? Asked Shadow. Where you were last time, said Whiskey Jack. My place. You planning on holding on to my bud till it warms up? They aren't good like that. Shadow stood up and passed him the can of beer. You didn't have a waterfall outside your place last time I was here, he said. Whiskey Jack said nothing. He popped up the top of the bud and drank half the can in one long, slow swallow. Then he said, You remember my nephew, Harry Bluejay, the poet? He traded his Buick for your Winnebago, remember? Sure. I didn't know he was a poet. Whiskey Jack raised his chin and looked proud. Best damn poet in America, he said. He drained the rest of his can of beer, belched, and got another can, while Shadow popped open his own can of beer, and the two men sat outside on a rock by the pale green ferns in the morning sun, and they watched the falling water and they drank their beer. There was still snow on the ground, in the places where the shadows never lifted. The earth was muddy and wet. Harry was diabetic, continued Whiskey Jack. It happens. Too much. You people came to America, you take our sugar cane, potatoes and corn, then you sell us potato chips and caramel popcorn, and we're the ones who get sick. He sipped his beer, reflecting. He'd won a couple of prizes for his poetry. There were people in Minnesota who wanted to put his poems into a book. He was driving to Minnesota in a sports car to talk to them. He had traded your Bago for a yellow Miata. The doctors said they think he went into a coma while he was driving, went off the road, ran the car into one of your road signs. Too lazy to look at where you are, to read the mountains and the clouds. You people need road signs everywhere. And so Harry Bluejay went away forever, went to live with Brother Wolf. So I said, nothing keeping me there any longer. I came north. Good fishing up here. I'm sorry about your nephew. Me too. So now I'm living here in the north, long way from white man's diseases. White man's roads, white man's road signs, white man's yellow Miatas, white man's caramel popcorn. White man's beer? Whiskey Jack looked at the can. When you people finally give up and go home, you can leave us the Budweiser breweries, he said. Where are we? Asked Shadow. Am I on the tree? Am I dead? Am I here? I thought everything was finished. What's real? Yes, said Whiskey Jack. Yes? What kind of an answer is yes? It's a good answer. True answer, too. Shadow said, Are you a god as well? Whiskey Jack shook his head. I'm a culture hero, he said. We do the same shit gods do. We just screw up more and nobody worships us. They tell stories about us, but they tell the ones which make us look bad, along with the ones where we came out fairly okay. I see, said Shadow. And he did see, more or less. Look, said Whiskey Jack, this is not a good country for gods. My people figured that out early on. There are creator spirits who found the earth or made it or shit it out. But you think about it. Who's going to worship Coyote? He made love to Porcupine Woman and got his dick shot through with more needles than a pincushion. He'd argue with rocks, and the rocks would win. So yeah, my people figured that maybe there's something at the back of it all, a creator, a great spirit. And so we say thank you to it because it's always good to say thank you, but we never built churches. We didn't need to. The land was the church. The land was the religion. The land was older and wiser than the people who walked on it. It gave us salmon and corn and buffalo and passenger pigeons. It gave us wild rice and walleye. It gave us melon and squash and turkey. and we were the children of the land, just like the porcupine and the skunk and the blue jay. He finished his second beer and gestured toward the river at the bottom of the waterfall. You follow that river for a way, you'll get to the lakes where the wild rice grows. And wild rice time, you go out in your canoe with a friend and you knock the wild rice into your canoe and cook it and store it, and it will keep you for a long time. Different places grow different foods. Go far enough south, there are orange trees, lemon trees, and those squashy green guys look like pears. Avocados. Avocados, agreed Whiskey Jack. That's them. They don't grow up this way. This is wild rice country. Moose country. What I'm trying to say is that America is like that. It's not good growing country for gods. They don't grow well here. They're like avocados trying to grow in wild rice country. They may not grow well, said Shadow, remembering, but they're going to war. That was the only time he ever saw Whiskey Jack laugh. It was almost a bark, and it had little humor in it. Hey, Shadow, said Whiskey Jack, if all your friends jumped off a cliff, would you jump off too? Maybe. Shadow felt good. He didn't think it was just the beer. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt so alive, and so together. It's not going to be a war. Then what is it? Whiskey Jack crushed the beer can between his hands, pressing it until it was flat. Look, he said, and pointed to the waterfall. The sun was high enough that it caught the waterfall spray. A rainbow nimbus hung in the air. Shadow thought it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. It's going to be a bloodbath, said Whiskey Jack flatly. Shadow saw it then. He saw it all, stark in its simplicity. He shook his head, then he began to chuckle, and he shook his head some more, and the chuckle became a full-throated laugh. You okay? I'm fine, said Shadow. I just saw the hidden Indians. Not all of them, but I saw them anyhow. Probably Ho Chunk then. Those guys never could hide worth a damn. He looked up at the sun. Time to go back, he said. He stood up. It's a two-man con, said Shadow. It's not a war at all, is it? Whiskey Jack patted Shadow's arm. You're not so dumb, he said. They walked back to Whiskey Jack's shack. He opened the door. Shadow hesitated. I wish I could stay here with you, he said. This seems like a good place. There are a lot of good places, said Whiskey Jack. That's kind of the point. Listen, gods die when they are forgotten. People too. But the land's still here. The good places and the bad. The land isn't going anywhere. And neither am I. Shadow closed the door. Something was pulling at him. He was alone in the darkness once more, but the darkness became brighter and brighter until it was burning like the sun. And then the pain began. There was a woman who walked through a meadow, and spring flowers blossomed where she had passed. In this place, and at this time, she called herself Easter. She passed a place where long ago a farmhouse had stood. Even today, several walls were still standing, jutting out of the weeds and the meadow grass like rotten teeth. A thin rain was falling. The clouds were dark and low, and it was cold. A little way beyond the place where the farmhouse had been, there was a tree, a huge silver-gray tree, winter dead to all appearances, and leafless, and in front of the tree, on the grass, were frayed clumps of colorless fabric. The woman stopped at the fabric and bent down and picked up something brownish-white. It was a much-gnawed fragment of bone, which might once have been a part of a human skull. She tossed it back down onto the grass. Then she looked at the man on the tree, and she smiled wryly. They just aren't as interesting naked, she said. It's the unwrapping that's half the fun, like with gifts and eggs. The hawk-headed man who walked beside her looked down at his penis and seemed for the first time to become aware of his own nakedness. He said, I can look at the sun without even blinking. That's very clever of you, Easter told him reassuringly. Now, let's get him down from there. The wet ropes that held Shadow to the tree had long ago weathered and rotted, and they parted easily as the two people pulled on them. The body on the tree slipped and slid down toward the roots. They caught him as he fell, and they took him up, carrying him easily, although he was a very big man, and they put him down in the gray meadow. The body on the grass was cold, and it did not breathe. There was a patch of dried black blood on its side, as if it had been stabbed with a spear. What now? Now, she said, we warm him. You know what you have to do. I know. I cannot. If you are not willing to help, then you should not have called me here. But it has been too long. It has been too long for all of us. And I am quite mad. I know. She reached out a white hand to Horace, and she touched his black hair. He blinked at her intently. Then he shimmered as if in a heat haze. The hawk eye that faced her glinted orange, as if a flame had just been kindled inside it, a flame that had been long extinguished. The hawk took to the air, and it swung upward, circling and ascending in a rising gyre, circling the place in the gray clouds where the sun might conceivably be. And as the hawk rose, it became first a dot, and then a speck, and then to the naked eye, nothing at all, something that could only be imagined. The clouds began to thin and to evaporate, creating a patch of blue sky through which the sun glared. The single bright sunbeam penetrating the clouds and bathing the meadow was beautiful, but the image faded as more clouds vanished. Soon the morning sun was blazing down on that meadow like a summer sun at noon, burning the water vapor from the morning's rain into mists and burning the mists off into nothing at all. The golden sun bathed the body on the floor of the meadow with its radiance and its heat. Shades of pink and of warm brown touched the dead thing. The woman dragged the fingers of her right hand lightly across the body's chest. She imagined she could feel a shiver in his breast, something that was not a heartbeat, but still. She let her hand remain there on his chest just above his heart. She lowered her lips to Shadow's lips, and she breathed into his lungs, a gentle in and out, and then the breath became a kiss. Her kiss was gentle, and it tasted of spring rains and meadow flowers. The wound in his side began to flow with liquid blood once more, a scarlet blood which oozed like liquid rubies in the sunlight, and then the bleeding stopped. She kissed his cheek and his forehead. "Come on," she said. "Time to get up. It's all happening. You don't want to miss it." His eyes fluttered, and then they opened. Two eyes of a gray so deep it was colorless, the gray of evening, and he looked at her. She smiled, and then she removed her hand from his chest. He said, "You called me back." He said it slowly, as if he had forgotten how to speak English. There was hurt in his voice, and puzzlement. "Yes. I was done. I was judged. It was over. You called me back. You dared." "I'm sorry." "Yes." He sat up slowly. He winced and touched his side. Then he looked puzzled. There was a beading of wet blood there, but there was no wound beneath it. He reached out a hand, and she put her arm around him and helped him to his feet. He looked across the meadow as if he was trying to remember the names of the things he was looking at. The flowers in the long grass, the ruins of the farmhouse, the haze of green buds that fogged the branches of the huge silver tree. "Do you remember?" she asked. "Do you remember what you learned?" "Yes. It will fade, though, like a dream. I know that. I lost my name and I lost my heart. And you brought me back." "I'm sorry," she said for the second time. "They are going to fight soon, the old gods and the new ones." "You want me to fight for you? You wasted your time." "I brought you back because that was what I had to do," she said. "It's what I can do. It's what I'm best at. What you do now is whatever you have to do. Your call. I did my part." Suddenly she became aware of his nakedness, and she blushed a burning scarlet flush, and she looked down and away. In the rain and the cloud, shadows moved up the side of the mountain, up to the rock pathways. White foxes padded up the hill in company with red-haired men in green jackets. There was a bull-headed minotaur walking beside an iron-fingered dactyl. A pig, a monkey, and a sharp-toothed ghoul clambered up the hillside, in company with a blue-skinned man holding a flaming bow, a bear with flowers twined into its fur, and a man in golden chain mail holding his sword of eyes. Beautiful Antinous, who was the lover of Hadrian, walked up the hillside at the head of a company of leather queens, their arms and chests steroid swollen and sculpted into perfect shapes. A gray-skinned man, his one cyclopean eye a huge cabochon emerald, walked stiffly up the hill ahead of several squat and swarthy men, their impassive faces as regular as Aztec carvings. They knew the secrets that the jungles had swallowed. A sniper at the top of the hill took careful aim at a white fox and fired. There was an explosion and a puff of cordite, gunpowder scent on the wet air. The corpse was a young Japanese woman with her stomach blown away, and her face all bloody. Slowly, the corpse began to fade. The people continued up the hill, on 2 legs, on 4 legs, on no legs at all. The drive through the Tennessee mountains country had been startlingly beautiful whenever the storm had eased, and nerve-wracking whenever the rain had pelted down. Town and Laura had talked and talked and talked the whole way. He was so glad he had met her. It was like meeting an old friend, a really good old friend you'd simply never met before. They talked history and movies and music, and she turned out to be the only person, and I mean the only other person, he had ever met who had seen a foreign film. Mr. Town was sure it was Spanish, while Laura was just as certain it was Polish, from the 60s, called The Manuscript Found in Saragossa, a film he had been starting to believe he had hallucinated. When Laura pointed out the first Sea Rock City barn to him, he chuckled and admitted that that was where he was headed. She said that was so cool. She always wanted to visit those kinds of places, but she never made the time, and always regretted it later. That was why she was on the road right now. She was having an adventure. She was a travel agent, she told him, separated from her husband. She admitted that she didn't think they could ever get back together, and said it was her fault. I can't believe that. She sighed. It's true, Mac. I'm just not the woman he married anymore. Well, he told her, people change, and before he could think he was telling her everything he could tell her about his life, he was even telling her about Woody and Stoner, how the three of them were the three musketeers, and the two of them were killed. You'd think you'd get hardened to that kind of thing in government work, but you never did. It never happened. And she reached out one hand. It was cold enough that he turned up the car's heating, and squeezed his hand tightly in hers. Lunchtime, they ate bad Japanese food, while a thunderstorm lowered on Knoxville, and Town didn't care that the food was late, that the miso soup was cold, or that the sushi was warm. He loved the fact that she was out with him, having an adventure. Well, confided Laura, I hated the idea of getting stale. I was just rotting away where I was. So I set off without my car and without my credit cards. I'm just relying on the kindness of strangers. And I've had the best time. People have been so good to me. Aren't you scared? He asked. I mean, you could be stranded, you could be mugged, you could starve. She shook her head. Then she said, with a hesitant smile, I met you, didn't I? And he couldn't find anything to say. When the meal was over, they ran through the storm to his car, holding Japanese language newspapers to cover their heads, and they laughed as they ran, like school children in the rain. How far can I take you? He asked, when they made it back into the car. I'll go as far as you're going, Mac, she told him, shyly. He was glad he hadn't used the Big Mac line. This woman wasn't a bar-room one-nighter. Mr. Town knew that in his soul. It might have taken him 50 years to find her, but this was finally it. This was the one, this wild, magical woman with the long dark hair. This was love. Look, he said as they approached Chattanooga. The wipers slushed the rain across the windshield, blurring the gray of the city. How about I find a motel for you tonight? I'll pay for it. And once I make my delivery, we can. Well, we can take a hot bath together for a start. Warm you up. That sounds wonderful, said Laura. What are you delivering? That stick, he told her, and chuckled. The one in the back seat. Okay, she said, humoring him. Then don't tell me, Mr. Mysterious. He told her it would be best if she waited in the car in the Rock City parking lot while he made his delivery. He drove up the side of Lookout Mountain in the gusting rain, never breaking 30 miles per hour, with his headlights burning. They parked at the back of the parking lot. He turned off the engine. Hey, Mac, before you get out of the car, don't I get a hug? Asked Laura with a smile. You surely do, said Mr. Town, and he put his arms around her, and she snuggled close to him while the rain pattered a tattoo on the roof of the Ford Explorer. He could smell her hair. There was a faintly unpleasant scent beneath the perfume. Travel would do it every time. That bath, he decided, was a real must for both of them. He wondered if there was any place in Chattanooga where he could get those scented bath bombs his first wife had loved so much. Laura raised her head against his, and her hand stroked the line of his neck absently. Mac, I keep thinking, you must really want to know what happened to those friends of yours, she said. Woody and Stone. Do you? Yeah, he said, moving his lips down to hers for their first kiss. Sure I do. So she showed him. Shadow walked the meadow, making his own slow circles around the trunk of the tree, gradually widening his circle. Sometimes he would stop and pick something up, a flower or a leaf or a pebble or a twig or a blade of grass. He would examine it minutely, as if concentrating entirely on the twigness of the twig, the leafness of the leaf, as if he were seeing it for the first time. Easter found herself reminded of the gaze of a baby at the point where it learns to focus. She did not dare to talk to him. At that moment, it would have been sacrilegious. She watched him, exhausted as she was, and she wondered. About 20 feet out from the base of the tree, half overgrown with long meadow grass and dead creepers, he found a canvas bag. Shadow picked it up, untied the knots at the top of the bag, loosened the drawstring. The clothes he pulled out were his own. They were old, but still serviceable. He turned the shoes over in his hands. He stroked the fabric of the shirt, the wool of the sweater, stared at them as if he were looking at them across a million years. For some time he looked at them, then, one by one, he put them on. He put his hands into his pockets and looked puzzled as he pulled one hand out, holding what looked to Easter like a white and gray marble. He said, "No coins." It was the first thing he had said in several hours. "No coins?" echoed Easter. He shook his head. "It was good to have the coins," he said. "They gave me something to do with my hands." He bent down to pull on his shoes. Once he was dressed, he looked more normal. Grave, though. She wondered how far he had traveled and what it had cost him to return. He was not the first whose return she had initiated, and she knew that, soon enough. The million-year stare would fade, and the memories and the dreams that he had brought back from the tree would be elided by the world of things you could touch. That was the way it always went. She led their way to the rear of the meadow. Her mount waited in the trees. "It can't carry both of us," she told him. "I'll make my own way home." Shadow nodded. He seemed to be trying to remember something. Then he opened his mouth, and he screeched a cry of welcome and joy. The thunderbird opened its cruel beak and screeched a welcome back at him. Superficially, at least, it resembled a condor. Its feathers were black, with a purplish sheen, and its neck was banded with white. Its beak was black and cruel, a raptor's beak made for tearing. At rest on the ground, with its wings folded away, it was the size of a black bear, and its head was on a level with Shadow's own. Horace said proudly, "I brought him. They live in the mountains." Shadow nodded. "I had a dream of thunderbirds once," he said. "Damnedest dream I ever had." The thunderbird opened its beak and made a surprisingly gentle noise. "Quaru? You heard my dream too?" "Oh, you heard my dream too?" asked Shadow. He reached out a hand and rubbed it gently against the bird's head. The thunderbird pushed up against him like an affectionate pony. He scratched it behind where the ears must have been. Shadow turned to Easter. "You rode him here?" "Yes," she said. "You can ride him back if he lets you." "How do you ride him?" "It's easy," she said. "If you don't fall. Like riding the lightning." "Will I see you back there?" She shook her head. "I'm done, honey," she told him. "You go do what you need to do. I'm tired. Bringing you back like that, it took a lot out of me. I need to rest, to save up my energies until my festival begins. I'm sorry. Good luck." Shadow nodded. "Whiskey Jack. I saw him, after I passed on. He came and found me. We drank beer together." "Yes," she said. "I'm sure you did." "Will I ever see you again?" asked Shadow. She looked at him with eyes the green of ripening corn. She said nothing. Then, abruptly, she shook her head. "I doubt it," she said. Shadow clambered awkwardly onto the thunderbird's back. He felt like a mouse on the back of a hawk. There was an ozone taste in his mouth, metallic and blue. Something crackled. The thunderbird extended its wings and began to flap them, hard. As the ground fell away beneath them, Shadow clung on, his heart pounding in his chest like a wild thing. It was exactly like riding the lightning. Laura took the stick from the back seat of the car. She left Mr. Town in the front seat of the Ford Explorer and climbed out of the car and walked through the rain into Rock City. The ticket office was closed. The door to the gift shop was not locked, and she walked through it, past the rock candy and the display of Sea Rock City birdhouses, into the eighth wonder of the world. Nobody challenged her, although she passed several men and women on the path, in the rain. Many of them looked faintly artificial. Several of them were translucent. She walked across a swinging rope bridge. She passed the white deer gardens and pushed herself through the fat man's squeeze, where the path ran between two rock walls. And in the end, she stepped over a chain with a sign on it telling her that this part of the attraction was closed, and she went into a cavern, and she saw a man sitting on a plastic chair in front of a diorama of drunken gnomes. He was reading the Washington Post by the light of a small electric lantern. When he saw her, he folded the paper and placed it beneath his chair. He stood up, a tall man with close-cropped orange hair and an expensive raincoat, and he gave her a small bow. "I shall assume that Mr. Town is dead," he said. "Welcome, spear carrier." "Thank you. I'm sorry about Mac," she said. "Were you friends?" "Not at all. He should have kept himself alive if he wanted to keep his job. But you brought his stick." He looked her up and down with eyes that glimmered like the orange embers of a dying fire. I'm afraid you have the advantage of me. They call me Mr. World, here at the top of the hill. I'm Shadow's wife. Of course, the lovely Laura, he said. I should have recognized you. He had several photographs of you above his bed in the cell that we once shared. And in the cell that once we shared. And if you don't mind me saying so, you are looking lovelier than you have any right to look. Shouldn't you be further along on the whole road to rot and ruin business by now? I was, she said simply. I was much further along. I'm not sure what changed. I know when I started feeling better. It was this morning. Those women in the farm. They gave me water from their well. An eyebrow raised. Erd's well? Surely not. She pointed to herself. Her skin was pale, and her eye sockets were dark, but she was manifestly whole. If she was indeed a walking corpse, she was freshly dead. It won't last, said Mr. World. The Norns gave you a little taste of the past. It will dissolve into the present soon enough, and then those pretty blue eyes will roll out of their sockets and ooze down those pretty cheeks, which will by then, of course, no longer be so pretty. By the way, you have my stick. Can I have it, please? She pulled out a pack of Lucky Strikes, took a cigarette, lit it with a disposable black Bic. She said, Can I have one of those? Sure, I'll give you a cigarette. He pulled out. I think I said she. He pulled out a pack of Lucky Strikes. Sure, I'll give you a cigarette if you give me my stick. No, she said. If you want it, it's worth more than just a cigarette. He said nothing. She said, I want answers. I want to know things. He lit a cigarette and passed it to her. She took it and inhaled. Then she blinked. I can almost taste this one, she said. I think maybe I can. She smiled. Nicotine. Yes, he said. Why did you go to the women in the farmhouse? Shadow told me to go to them, he said. She said. He said to ask them for water. I wonder if he knew what it would do. Probably not. Still, that's the good thing about having him dead on his tree. I know where he is at all times now. He's off the board. You set up my husband, she said. You set him up all the way, you people. He has a good heart, you know that? Yes, said Mr. World, I know. Why did you want him? Patterns and distraction, said Mr. World. When this is all done with, I guess I'll sharpen a stick of mistletoe and go down to the ash tree, and ram it through his eye. That's what those morons fighting out there have never been able to grasp. It's never a matter of old and new. It's only about patterns. Now, my stick, please. Why do you want it? It's a souvenir of this whole sorry mess, said Mr. World. Don't worry, it's not mistletoe. He flashed a grin. It symbolizes a spear, and in this sorry world, the symbol is the thing. The noises from outside grew louder. Which side are you on? She asked. It's not about sides, he told her. But since you asked, I'm on the winning side. Always. That's what I do best. She nodded, and she did not let go of the stick. I can see that, she said. She turned away from him and looked out of the cavern door. Far below her, in the rocks, she could see something that glowed and pulsed. It wrapped itself around a thin, mauve-faced, bearded man who was beating at it with a squeegee stick, the kind of squeegee that people like him use to smear across car windshields at traffic lights. There was a scream, and they both disappeared from view. Okay, I'll give you the stick, she said. Mr. World's voice came from behind her. Good girl, he said reassuringly, in a way that struck her as being both patronizing and indefinably male. It made her skin crawl. She waited in the rock doorway until she could hear his breath in her ear. She had to wait until he got close enough. She had that much figured out. The ride was more than exhilarating. It was electric. They swept through the storm like jagged bolts of lightning, flashing from cloud to cloud. They moved like the thunder's roar, like the swell and rip of the hurricane. It was a crackling, impossible journey, and Shadow forgot to be scared almost immediately. You cannot be afraid when you ride the Thunderbird. There is no fear. Only the power of the storm, unstoppable and all-consuming, and the joy of the flight. Shadow dug his fingers into the Thunderbird's feathers, feeling the static prickle on his skin. Blue sparks writhed across his hands like tiny snakes. Rain washed his face. This is the best! He shouted over the roar of the storm. As if it understood him, the bird began to rise higher, every wing beat a clap of thunder, and it swooped and dove and tumbled through the dark clouds. In my dream, I was haunting you, said Shadow, his words ripped away by the wind. In my dream, I had to bring back a feather. Yes, the word was a static crackle in the radio of his mind. They came to us for feathers, to prove that they were men, and they came to us to cut the stones from our heads, to give their dead our lives. An image filled his mind then of a thunderbird, a female, he assumed, for her plumage was brown, not black, lying freshly dead on the side of a mountain. Beside it was a woman. She was breaking open its skull with a knob of flint. She picked through the wet shards of bone and the brains until she found a smooth, clear stone, the tawny color of garnet, opalescent fires flickering in its depths. Eagle stones, thought Shadow. She was going to take it to her infant son, dead these last 3 nights, and she would lay it on his cold breast. By the next sunrise, the boy would be alive and laughing, and the jewel would be gray and clouded, and like the bird it had been stolen from, quite dead. I understand, he said to the bird. The bird threw back its head and crowed, and its cry was the thunder. The world beneath them flashed past in one strange dream. Laura adjusted her grip on the stick, and she waited for the man she knew as Mr. World to come to her. She was facing away from him, looking out at the storm and the dark green hills below. In this sorry world, she thought, the symbol is the thing. Yes. She felt his hand close softly onto her right shoulder. Good, she thought. He does not want to alarm me. He is scared that I will throw his stick out into the storm, that it will tumble down the mountainside and he will lose it. She leaned back just a little until she was touching his chest with her back. His left arm curved around her. It was an intimate gesture. His left hand was open in front of her. She closed both of her hands around the top of his stick, exhaled, concentrated. Please. My stick, he said in her ears. Yes, she said, it's yours. And then, not knowing if it would mean anything, she said, I dedicate this death to Shadow. And she stabbed the stick into her chest, just below the breastbone, felt it writhe and change in her hands as the stick became a spear. The boundary between sensation and pain had diffused since she had died. She felt the spearhead penetrate her chest, felt it push out through her back. A moment's resistance, she pushed harder, and the spear thrust into Mr. World. She could feel the warm breath of him on the cool skin of her neck, as he wailed in hurt and surprise, impaled on the spear. She did not recognize the words he spoke, nor the language he said them in. She pushed the shaft of the spear further in, forcing it through her body, into and through his. She could feel his hot blood spurting onto her back. Bitch, he said in English. You fucking bitch! There was a wet, gurgling quality to his voice. She guessed that the blade of the spear must have sliced a lung. Mr. World was moving now, or trying to move, and every move he made rocked her too. They were joined by the pole, impaled together like 2 fish on a single spear. He now had a knife in one hand, she saw, and he stabbed her chest and breasts randomly and wildly with the knife, unable to see what he was doing. She did not care. What are knife cuts to a corpse? She brought her fist down, hard, on his waving wrist, and the knife went flying to the floor of the cavern. She kicked it away. And now he was crying and wailing. She could feel him pushing against her, his hands fumbling at her back, his hot tears on her neck. His blood was soaking her back, spurting down the back of her legs. This must look so undignified, she said in a dead whisper which was not without a certain dark amusement. She felt Mr. World stumble behind her, and she stumbled too, and then she slipped in the blood, all of it his, that was puddling on the floor of the cave, and they both went down. The Thunderbird landed in the Rock City parking lot. Rain was falling in sheets. Shadow could barely see a dozen feet in front of his face. He let go of the Thunderbird's feathers and half slipped, half tumbled to the wet tarmac. The bird looked at him. Lightning flashed, and the bird was gone. Shadow climbed to his feet. The parking lot was 3/4 empty. Shadow started toward the entrance. He passed a brown Ford Explorer, parked against a rock wall. There was something deeply familiar about the car, and he glanced up at it curiously, noticing the man inside the car slumped over the steering wheel as if asleep. Shadow pulled open the driver's door. He had last seen Mr. Town standing outside the motel in the center of America. The expression on his face was one of surprise. His neck had been expertly broken. Shadow touched the man's face, still warm. Shadow could smell a scent on the air in the car. It was faint, like the perfume of someone who left a room years before. But Shadow would have known it anywhere. He slammed the door of the Explorer and made his way across the parking lot. As he walked, he felt a twinge in his side, a sharp, jabbing pain that must have only existed in his head, as it lasted only for a second, or less, and then it was gone. There was nobody in the gift shop, nobody selling tickets. He walked through the building and out into the gardens of Rock City. Thunder rumbled, and it rattled the branches of the trees and shook deep inside the huge rocks, and the rain fell with cold violence. It was late afternoon, but it was dark as night. A trail of lightning speared across the clouds, and Shadow wondered if that was the thunderbird returning to its high crags, or just an atmospheric discharge, or whether the two ideas were, on some level, the same thing. And of course they were. That was the point, after all. Somewhere a man's voice called out. Shadow heard it. The only words he recognized, or thought he recognized, were, "To Odin!" Shadow hurried across the Seven States flag court, the flagstones now running fast with a dangerous amount of rainwater. Once he slipped on the slick stone. There was a thick layer of cloud surrounding the mountain, and in the gloom and the storm beyond the courtyard he could see no States at all. There was no sound. The place seemed utterly abandoned. He called out and imagined he heard something answering. He walked toward the place from which he thought the sound had come. Nobody. Nothing. Just a chain marking the entrance to a cave as off-limits to guests. Shadow stepped over the chain. He looked around, peering into the darkness. His skin prickled. A voice from behind him in the shadows said very quietly, "You have never disappointed me." Shadow did not turn. "That's weird," he said. "I disappointed myself all the way. Every time." "Not at all," chuckled the voice. "You did everything you were meant to do, and more. You took everybody's attention, so they never looked at... Wait. I might be reading the wrong voice. I am reading the wrong voice. I'm going to start that part over. A voice from behind him in the shadows said very quietly, "You have never disappointed me." Shadow did not turn. "That's weird," he said. "I disappointed myself all the way, every time." "Not at all," chuckled the voice. "You did everything you were meant to do, and more. You took everybody's attention, so they never looked at the hand with the coin in it. It's called misdirection. And there's power in the sacrifice of a son. Power enough and more than enough to get the whole ball rolling. To tell the truth, I'm proud of you." "It was crooked," said Shadow. "All of it. None of it was for real. It was just a setup for a massacre." "Exactly," said Wednesday's voice from the shadows. "It was crooked, but it was the only game in town." "I want Laura," said Shadow. "I want Loki. Where are they?" There was only silence. A spray of rain gusted at him. Thunder rumbled somewhere close at hand. He walked further in. Loki Lysmith sat on the ground with his back to a metal cage. Inside the cage, drunken pixies tended their still. He was covered with a blanket. Only his face showed, and his hands, white and long, came around the blanket. An electric lantern sat on a chair beside him. The lantern's batteries were close to failing, and the light it cast was faint and yellow. He looked pale, and he looked rough. His eyes were still fiery, and they glared at Shadow as he walked through the cavern. When Shadow was several paces from Loki, he stopped. "You are too late," said Loki. His voice was raspy and wet. "I have thrown the spear. I have dedicated the battle. It has begun." "No shit," said Shadow. "No shit," said Loki. "It does not matter what you do anymore. It is too late." "Okay," said Shadow. He stopped and thought. Then he said, "You say there's some spear you had to throw to kick off the battle, like the whole Uppsala thing. This is the battle you'll be feeding on. Am I right?" Silence. He could hear Loki breathing, a ghastly, rattling inhalation. "I figured it out," said Shadow. "Kind of. I'm not sure when I figured it out. Maybe when I was hanging on the tree. Maybe before. It was from something Wednesday said to me at Christmas." Loki just stared at him, saying nothing. "It's just a two-man con," said Shadow. "Like the bishop and the diamond necklace and the cop. Like the guy with the fiddle and the guy who wants to buy the fiddle and the poor sap in between them who pays for the fiddle. Two men who appear to be on opposite sides, playing the same game." Loki whispered, "You are ridiculous." "Why?" "I liked what you did at the motel. That was smart. You needed to be there to make sure that everything went according to plan. I saw you. I even realized who you were. And I still never twigged that you were the Mr. World. Or maybe I did, somewhere down deep. I knew your voice, anyway." Shadow raised his voice. "You can come out," he said to the cavern. "Wherever you are. Show yourself." The wind howled in the opening of the cavern, and it drove a spray of rainwater in toward them. Shadow shivered. "I'm tired of being played for a sucker," said Shadow. "Show yourself. Let me see you." There was a change in the shadows at the back of the cave. Something became more solid. Something shifted. "You know too damn much, my boy," said Wednesday's familiar rumble. So they didn't kill you. They killed me, said Wednesday from the shadows. None of this would have worked if they hadn't. His voice was faint, not actually quiet, but there was a quality to it that made Shadow think of an old radio not quite tuned into a distant station. If I hadn't died for real, we could never have got them here, said Wednesday. Kali and the Morgan and the Loa and the fucking Albanians and, well, you've seen them all. It was my death that drew them all together. I was the sacrificial lamb. No, said Shadow. You were the Judas goat. The wraith shape in the shadows swirled and shifted. Not at all. That implies that I was betraying the old gods for the new, which was not what we were doing. Not at all, whispered Loki. I can see that, said Shadow. You two weren't betraying either side. You were betraying both sides. I guess we were at that, said Wednesday. He sounded pleased with himself. You wanted a massacre. You needed a blood sacrifice. A sacrifice of gods. The wind grew stronger. The howl across the cave door became a screech, as if of something immeasurably huge in pain. And why the hell not? I've been trapped in this damned land for almost 1,200 years. My blood is thin. I'm hungry. And you two feed on death, said Shadow. He thought he could see Wednesday now, standing in the shadows. Behind him, through him, were the bars of a cage which held what looked like plastic leprechauns. He was a shape made of darkness, who became more real the more Shadow looked away from him, allowed him to take shape in his peripheral vision. I feed on death that is dedicated to me, said Wednesday. Like my death on the tree, said Shadow. That, said Wednesday, was special. And do you also feed on death? Asked Shadow, looking at Loki. Loki shook his head wearily. No, of course not, said Shadow. You feed on chaos. Loki smiled at that, a brief pained smile, and orange flames danced in his eyes and flickered like burning lace beneath his pale skin. We couldn't have done it without you, said Wednesday from the corner of Shadow's eye. I'd been with so many women. You needed a son, said Shadow. Wednesday's ghost voice echoed. I needed you, my boy. Yes, my own boy. I knew that you had been conceived, but your mother left the country. It took us so long to find you. And when we did find you, you were in prison. We needed to find out what made you tick, what buttons we could press to make you move, who you were. Loki looked momentarily pleased with himself. Shadow wanted to hit him. And you had a wife to go back home to. It was unfortunate. Not insurmountable. She was no good for you, whispered Loki. You were better off without her. If it could have been any other way, said Wednesday, and this time Shadow knew what he meant. And if she'd had the grace to stay dead, panted Loki, wood and stone were good men. You were going to be allowed to escape when the train crossed the Dakotas. Where is she? Asked Shadow. Loki reached a pale arm and pointed to the back of the cavern. She went that-a-way, he said. Then, without warning, he tipped forward, his body collapsing onto the rock floor. Shadow saw what the blanket had hidden from him. The pool of blood, the hole through Loki's back, the fawn raincoat soaked black with blood. What happened? He said. Loki said nothing. Shadow did not think he would say anything anymore. Shadow did not think he would be saying anything anymore. Your wife happened to him, my boy, said Wednesday's distant voice. He had become harder to see, as if he was fading back into the ether. But the battle will bring him back, as the battle will bring me back for good. I'm a ghost, and he's a corpse, but we've still won. The game was rigged. Rigged games, said Shadow, remembering, are the easiest to beat. There was no answer. Nothing moved in the shadows. Shadow said, Goodbye. And then he said, Father. But by then there was no trace of anybody else in the cavern. Nobody at all. Shadow walked back up to the Seven States flag court, but saw nobody and heard nothing but the crack and whip of the flags in the storm wind. There were no people with swords at the 1,000-ton balanced rock, no defenders of the swing-along bridge. He was alone. There was nothing to see. The place was deserted. It was an empty battlefield. No, not deserted. Not exactly. He was just in the wrong place. This was Rock City. It had been the place of awe and worship for thousands of years. Today, the millions of tourists who walked through the gardens and swung their way across the swing-along bridge had the same effect as water turning a million prayer wheels. Reality was thin here, and Shadow knew where the battle must be taking place. With that, he began to walk. He remembered how he had felt on the carousel, tried to feel like that, but in a new moment of time. He remembered turning the Winnebago, shifting it at right angles to everything. He tried to capture that sensation. And then, easily and perfectly, it happened. It was like pushing through a membrane, like plunging up from deep water into air. With one step, he had moved from the tourist path on the mountain to somewhere real. He was backstage. He was still on top of the mountain. That much remained the same. But it was so much more than that. This mountaintop was the quintessence of place, the heart of things as they were. Compared to it, the lookout mountain he had left was a painting on a backdrop, or a papier-mâché model seen on a TV screen, merely a representation of the thing, not the thing itself. This was the true place. The rock walls formed a natural amphitheater. Paths of stone wound around and across it, forming twisty natural bridges that ushered through and across the rock walls. And the sky. The sky was dark. It was lit, and the world beneath it was illuminated by a burning greenish-white streak, brighter than the sun, which forked crazily across the sky from end to end, like a white rip in the darkened sky. It was lightning, Shadow realized. Lightning held in one frozen moment that stretched into forever. The light it cast was harsh and unforgiving. It washed out faces, hollowed eyes into dark pits. This was the moment of the storm. The paradigms were shifting. He could feel it. The old world, a world of infinite vastness and illimitable resources and future, was being confronted by something else. A web of energy, of opinions, of gulfs. People believe, thought Shadow. It's what people do. They believe. And then they will not take responsibility for their beliefs. They conjure things and do not trust the conjurations. People populate the darkness with ghosts, with gods, with electrons, with tails. People imagine, and people believe. And it is that belief, that rock-solid belief, that makes things happen. The mountaintop was an arena. He saw that immediately. And on each side of the arena he could see them arrayed. They were too big. Everything was too big in that place. There were old gods in that place. Gods with skins the brown of old mushrooms, the pink of chicken flesh, the yellow of autumn leaves. Some were crazy and some were sane. Shadow recognized the old gods. He'd met them already, or he'd met others like them. They were ifrits and piskies, giants and dwarves. He saw the woman he had met in the darkened bedroom in Rhode Island, saw the writhing green snake coils of her hair. He saw Mama G from the carousel, and there was blood on her hands and a smile on her face. He knew them all. He recognized the new ones, too. There was somebody who had to be a railroad baron in an antique suit, his watch chain stretched across his vest. He had the air of one who had seen better days. His forehead twitched. There were the great gray gods of the airplanes, heirs to all the dreams of heavier-than-air travel. There were gods there. There were car gods there, a powerful, serious-faced contingent, with blood on their black gloves and on their chrome teeth, recipients of human sacrifice on a scale undreamed of since the Aztecs. Even they looked uncomfortable. Worlds change. Others had faces of smudged phosphors. They glowed gently, as if they existed in their own light. Shadow felt sorry for them all. There was an arrogance to the new ones. Shadow could see that, but there was also a fear. They were afraid that unless they kept pace with a changing world, unless they remade and redrew and rebuilt the world in their image, their time would already be over. Each side faced the other with bravery. To each side, the opposition were the demons, the monsters, the damned. Shadow could see an initial skirmish had taken place. There was already blood on the rocks. They were readying themselves for the real battle, for the real war. It was now or never, he thought. If he did not move now, it would be too late. In America, everything goes on forever, said a voice in the back of his head. The 1950s lasted for 1,000 years. You have all the time in the world. Shadow walked in something that was half a stroll, half a controlled stumble, into the center of the arena. He could feel eyes on him, eyes and things that were not eyes. He shivered. The buffalo voice said, "You are doing just fine." Shadow thought, "Damn right, I came back from the dead this morning. After that, everything else should be a piece of cake." "You know," said Shadow to the air in a conversational voice, "this is not a war. This was never intended to be a war. And if any of you think this is a war, you are deluding yourselves." He heard grumbling noises from both sides. He had impressed nobody. "We are fighting for our survival," lowed a minotaur from one side of the arena. We are fighting for our existence, shouted a mouth in a pillar of glittering smoke from the other. This is a bad land for gods, said Shadow. As an opening statement, it wasn't friends, Romans, countrymen, but it would do. You've probably all learned that in your own way. The old gods are ignored. The new gods are as quickly taken up as they are abandoned, cast aside for the next big thing. Either you've been forgotten, or you're scared you're going to be rendered obsolete, or maybe you're just getting tired of existing on the whim of people. The grumbles were fewer now. He had said something they agreed with. Now, while they were listening, he had to tell them the story. There was a god who came here from a far land, and whose power and influence waned as belief in him faded. He was a god who took his power from sacrifice and from death, and especially from war. He would have deaths of those who fell in war dedicated to him, whole battlefields which in the old country gave him power and sustenance. Now he was old. He made his living as a grifter, working with another god from his pantheon, a god of chaos and deceit. Together they rooked the gullible. Together they took people for all they'd got. Somewhere in there, maybe 50 years ago, maybe 100, they put a plan into motion, a plan to create a reserve of power they could both tap into, something that would make them stronger than they had ever been. After all, what could be more powerful than a battlefield covered with dead gods? The game they played was called Let's You and Him Fight. Do you see? The battle you're here to fight isn't something that any of you can win or lose. The winning and the losing are unimportant to him, to them. What matters is that enough of you die. Each of you that falls in battle gives him power. Every one of you that dies feeds him. Do you understand? The roaring, whoomphing sound of something catching on fire echoed across the arena. Sorry, there's like cat hair everywhere. Shadow looked to the place the noise came from. An enormous man, his skin the deep brown of mahogany, his chest naked, wearing a top hat, cigar sticking rakishly from his mouth, spoke in a voice as deep as the grave. Baron Samedi said, "Okay, but Odin, he died at the peace talks. Motherfuckers killed him. He died. I know death. Nobody gonna fool me about death." Shadow said, "Obviously, he had to die for real. He sacrificed his physical body to make this war happen. After the battle, he would have been more powerful than he had ever been." Somebody called. "Who are you?" I am his son." One of the new gods, Shadow suspected it was a drug from the way it smiled and spangled and shivered, said, "But Mr. World said there was no Mr. World. There never was. He was just another one of you bastards trying to feed on the chaos he created." He could see that they believed him, and he could see the hurt in their eyes. Shadow shook his head. "You know," he said, I think I would rather be a man than a god. We don't need anyone to believe in us. We just keep going anyhow. It's what we do." There was silence in the high place, and then, with a shocking crack, the lightning bolt, frozen in the sky, crashed to the mountaintop, and the arena went entirely dark. They glowed, many of those presences, in the darkness. Shadow wondered if they were going to argue with him, to attack him, to try to kill him. He waited for some kind of response. And then Shadow realized that the lights were going out. The gods were leaving that place, first in handfuls, then by scores, and finally in their hundreds. A spider the size of a Rottweiler scuttled heavily toward him on 7 legs. Its cluster of eyes glowed faintly. Shadow held his ground, although he felt slightly sick. When the spider got close enough, it said in Mr. Nancy's voice, "That was a good job. Proud of you. You done good, kid." "Thank you," said Shadow. "We should get you back. Too long in this place is going to mess you up." It rested one brown-haired spider leg on Shadow's shoulder. And back on Seven States Flag Court, Mr. Nancy coughed. His right hand rested on Shadow's shoulder. The rain had stopped. Mr. Nancy held his left hand across his side as if it hurt. Shadow asked if he was okay. "I'm tough as old nails," said Mr. Nancy. "Tougher." He did not sound happy. He sounded like an old man in pain. There were dozens of them, standing or sitting on the ground or on the benches. Some of them looked badly injured. Shadow could hear a rattling noise in the sky, approaching from the south. He looked at Mr. Nancy. "Helicopters?" Mr. Nancy nodded. "Don't you worry about them. Not anymore. They'll just clean up the mess and leave. They're good at it." "Got it." Shadow knew that there was one part of the mess he wanted to see for himself, before it was cleaned up. He borrowed a flashlight from a gray-haired man who looked like a retired news anchor and began to hunt. He found Laura stretched out on the ground in a side cavern beside a diorama of mining gnomes straight out of Snow White. The floor beneath her was sticky with blood. She was on her side, where Loki must have dropped her after he had pulled the spear out of them both. One of Laura's hands clutched her chest. She looked dreadfully vulnerable. She also looked dead, but then Shadow was almost used to that by now. Shadow squatted beside her, and he touched her cheek with his hand, and he said her name. Her eyes opened, and she lifted her head and turned it until she was looking at him. "Hello, puppy," she said. Her voice was thin. "Hi, Laura. What happened here?" "Nothing," she said. "Just stuff. Did they win?" "I don't know," said Shadow. "I think these things are kind of relative. But I stopped the battle they were trying to start." "My clever puppy," she said. "That man, Mr. World, he said he was going to put a stick through your eye. I didn't like him at all." "He's dead. You killed him, hun." She nodded. She said, "That's good." Her eyes closed. Shadow's hand found her cold hand, and he held it in his. In time, she opened her eyes again. "Did you ever figure out how to bring me back from the dead?" she asked. "I guess," he said. "I know one way, anyway." "That's good," she said. She squeezed his hand with her cold hand. Then she said, "And the opposite? What about that?" "The opposite?" "Yes," she whispered. "I think I must have earned it." "I don't want to do that." She said nothing. She simply waited. Shadow said, "Okay." Then he took his hand from hers and put it to her neck. She said, "That's my husband." She said it proudly. "I love you, babes," said Shadow. "Love you, puppy," she whispered. He closed his hand around the golden coin that hung around her neck. He tugged hard at the chain, which snapped easily. Then he took the gold coin beneath his finger and thumb and blew on it and opened his hand wide. The coin was gone. Her eyes were still open, but they did not move. He bent down then and kissed her gently on her cold cheek, but she did not respond. He did not expect her to. Then he got up and walked out of the cavern to stare into the night. The storms had cleared. The air felt fresh and clean and new once more. Tomorrow, he had no doubt, would be one hell of a beautiful day. All right, that was kind of a long chapter. Next is the epilogue, and it's part 4. So I guess that was the end of the main story, but there is still a lot more left. It's not, I mean, not number wise, it's not very many more pages or whatever, but like it's very eventful still, even though it's like the end. So looking forward to that. Yeah, because there's 20 chapters, I thought, and this was what, 18, 19, no, 18. Yeah, so there's 2 more chapters, and then there's like a, what is it, a postscript that is, I think, still worth reading. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of still part of the story. And then there's just like, I don't know, there's like a deleted scene, whatever the book version of that is called. There's a part of the book that like was going to be part of the main book and then was cut, but he still included it afterwards just because why not? So that could be a thing. If you're interested, I can read that. But yeah, basically there's 2 chapters left. And I don't know why it's called an epilogue. It's still part of the story. So anyway, oh buddy, say goodbye. I don't know when I'll be reading it. Because I'm not gonna have time until after my surgery. So we'll just have to see. I'll play that one by ear. But I think the next chapter is short too, so it shouldn't be too bad. Chapter 19 is, what page is that? 689 2. Oh, it's really short. Oh, it's just like 3 pages. Or maybe more. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, like 4 pages. And then so I can probably, my point is I can probably do them both in one session. Might as well. It'll be really short. It'll be like a 10-minute reading if I do just chapter 19 alone. But chapter 20 is very... Chapter 20... Yeah, it's like a normal length, I think. So yeah, it'll just be like a slightly long reading. Tonight was slightly long too. So, yeah, so one more reading and like, well, 2 more readings, because I'll read the next 2 chapters next time and then the postscript after that. Because if I remember correctly, there's some shit goes down there too. I was like, whoa, okay. Anyway, so yeah, I'll see you as soon as I'm feeling up for it. Probably sometime next week. Probably be fine. It doesn't take that much effort to read. So unless I'm like really feeling like shit, I should be able to do it at some point. And I'll be doing nothing but resting beforehand because I'm not working that whole week. There's nothing planned. I'm just gonna like relax and chill. So we'll see. Anyway, good night.